We dive into another mailbag next here on Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And we return here with another episode of Locked On Ravens. I'm your host, Kevin Ostreicher of Ravens Wire. This episode of Locked On Ravens is brought to you by McDonald's. Proudly serving communities since 1965, McDonald's has always been more than just a place to get tasty, affordable food. It's an unofficial community center. A big thanks to our friends at McDonald's for always being there. I'm loving it. And we return here with our Wednesday episode of Locked On Ravens. And this is another mailbag episode. Again, we got a ton of questions. A big thank you to everybody who did submit their questions. And this is a big week for the Ravens. A divisional matchup with the Cincinnati Bengals looms large. The Bengals, which are the second place team in the AFC North, not the Cleveland Browns, not the Pittsburgh Steelers. Yes, the Cincinnati Bengals come in at 4-2. The Baltimore Ravens, obviously, in first place. The top record in the AFC at 5-1. So in this mailbag episode, we'll dive into some offensive questions. We'll talk about the defense a bit as well. Look at the schedule ahead of the bye, and also behind that bye is pretty different schedules for the Ravens in the first half of the year versus the second half of the year. So we got a ton of questions. We're going to dive into all the news now and all those questions. Now 3 mailbag segments for our mailbag episode. So before we dive into all the questions, if you are following along with us here on YouTube in video form, be sure to subscribe to the channel, like the video if you do enjoy our content. Our first goal here on the YouTube is 1,000 subscribers, so anyone who does subscribe, I greatly appreciate and already appreciate everybody who has already subscribed, and thank you for making Locked On Ravens your first listen of the day. And also if following along with us in audio form, so Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, anywhere you get your shows, be sure to follow along with us, turn notifications on so you know when our content comes out. But I'll tell you right here, it's Monday through Friday, 6 a.m. Eastern Time when it comes out. And also be sure to follow me on Twitter at KOstriker34 and the Locked On Ravens Twitter account at Locked On Ravens. So with all that being said, we're going to dive into our mailbag here again. A lot of good questions. We're going to start off with a question that relates to, I think, the biggest news of yesterday, and it's from It's Lamar Season. And he asks, what is with the statement working towards resolution with Ronnie Stanley? And so this question was asked on Monday. So Ronnie Stanley, the resolution, John Harbaugh kind of talked about it during that Monday press conference, and people were kind of speculating what it could mean. And now we know what it meant. Ronnie Stanley is going on injured reserve. Well, he's already there. He's already on injured reserve. He went under the knife on Tuesday. He had his ankle surgery, multiple ankle surgeries for Stanley. He suffered a gruesome one, an injury there. In the middle of the 2020 season, TJ Watt accidentally got rolled up on his ankle, and it's just, the video is pretty horrifying. You know, every time I watch it, I cringe. I feel terrible for what Stanley's going through. Stanley did come back in 2021, ended up playing in the opening game against Las Vegas, but he just didn't look like Ronnie Stanley. And so that resolution that the Ravens were nearing is now confirmed, as he will not be available for the remainder of this 2021 season. And I think that for a lot of people, myself included, every week it seems like he just wasn't going to play. You know, he wouldn't practice the first day. And I would come on the show every week and say, I would be pretty shocked if Stanley did play. And that was a theme for like 2 or 3 weeks where I could kind of feel that Stanley wasn't playing already because, you know, he didn't practice that first day, then obviously the second day, then obviously the third day, and he's ruled out before game day. So I think this is the best move for Stanley and his health. Now, I know a lot of people, you know, they feel bad for Stanley, and they understand the magnitude of this loss for the Ravens, because when Ronnie Stanley is at 100% and he is playing at his level that I think we've all become accustomed to, he is an absolute asset, the Ravens' best offensive lineman on the field. But we saw in Las Vegas what Stanley was like when he was not healthy, and that on the field is a liability, unfortunately. So to have Stanley out there at 60%, not performing well as having that risk for re-injury and making things worse, I think this was the right decision for Stanley and the Ravens to make, just for not only this year, but for future years for Stanley's health. Because the number one thing, obviously, I hope Stanley can make a full recovery and he doesn't have any problems with this and he can get back on the field healthy and doing what he loves. But he put out a series of tweets And he was devastated. He said in those tweets after his surgery that he wants to be on the field, but he understands that this was the best decision for him. So that was the resolution that the Ravens and Stanley came to. And I do think it's the best one. Stanley has not played a full season in his entire career. He is a bit injury prone. But look, injuries happen. Football is a very serious game. It takes a very big toll on a player's body. So, Stanley's been unfortunate with his injury luck, but we all know what he can do on the football field. And I think that with Stanley, him coming back in 2022 completely healthy on that left side will give the Ravens such a boost. And for now, they have the depth with Villanueva and with McCary, and they just got Brandon Knight from the Dallas Cowboys, and they are signing guys for the practice squad, Andre Smith, David Sharp, whoever you want to call it. They have the depth there. Now, obviously, that depth is no Ronnie Stanley, but at this time, I think the Ravens and Stanley did make the right decision. We're going to move on to two questions now, though, from Be More Raven Guy before we head into our first break. The first being, does Bynes start from here on out at inside linebacker? And I think that the Ravens will definitely keep Bynes there for now. I think that if he continues to perform the way he did, Bynes was incredible against Los Angeles. His actual stat line, if you want to look at the pure box score stats, it doesn't tell the whole story, but the pure box score stats for Bynes, 6 total tackles. He had 3 of those solo. He had a tackle for loss, a pass defense. So he was all over the field. He was flying. There was that one tackle he made where he just leapt and flew. He was playing with some rejuvenation on the football field. And it was kind of like this was the start of the Josh Bynes era in Baltimore. Now, Baltimore has a ton of talented inside linebackers, Patrick Queen, Malik Harrison, Chris Board. You can talk about Kristen Welch as well. Those guys are all great, but the Ravens, and particularly Patrick Queen and Malik Harrison, were missing a guy like LJ Fort in that lineup. And I talked on this show about the Ravens maybe toying with the possibility of putting a veteran next to Patrick Queen and Malik Harrison so they don't have to process as much. They can play a bit more freely. And I think it helped them. And I was considering, is that player going to come in via trade, or is it going to be Josh Bynes who they have on the practice squad? I wasn't really in favor of, or I didn't have a preference, I'll say, compared to either. I was fine with Bynes being the guy, and I was fine with the trade, but it seems like the Ravens have their guy in Bynes. I wouldn't be shocked if they were kind of looking around and seeing they actually signed an inside linebacker to the practice squad yesterday in Joe Thomas, not Browns offensive lineman Joe Thomas, former Browns offensive lineman Joe Thomas, but linebacker Joe Thomas. So, they're looking for a bit of depth there, but I think it would be smart for the Ravens to keep Bynes, at least if he's not starting, in a big role next to Queen, because it really seemed like Queen was benefiting from him. And for Malik Harrison, it will definitely help him as well. It seemed like Chris Board was also getting a bunch of run in those pass down situations, and it seems like the Ravens kind of trust him in those situations. He's a very versatile player himself. But I think Bynes, is an early down run stuffer, a veteran presence in the middle of that defense is a huge get for a team that, with Queen and Harrison next to each other, young players can struggle, especially when they don't have a ton of experience, even though they're talented. So I'd expect Bynes to definitely stay, if not starting, in a very big role for the remainder of the year, or at least for most of it. The only situation I see him not doing that is if he just immensely struggles, which, with him and his ability and his leadership and experience, I don't really see that. Our final question here, though, from Be More Ravens Guy, talks about the running backs. And he asks, are we healthy scratching Tyson Williams as he could potentially be traded? And so, yeah, could Tyson Williams be traded? Potentially. I think for now, though, the Ravens are pretty content with what they have. Now, there have been the reports and the stuff that has kind of come out about the Ravens not being particularly happy with Tyson Williams, that he's not running hard enough and being tentative and with the fumbles and stuff. So those are all valid concerns, but I think the Ravens do still believe in him. It's just a matter of right now, if the Ravens aren't trading for James Robinson or a Marlon Mack, or you want to throw Mark Ingram or David Johnson or Philip Lindsay into that conversation, I don't know if the Ravens are going to necessarily scavenge the market for a running back. It wouldn't be shocking if they did, and I think they could definitely serve to add a person. But they just promoted Le'Veon Bell from the practice squad. They have Devonta Freeman, and Williams himself, I think, with more opportunities, could shine. I don't think we've seen the end of Tyson Williams. Now, obviously, that changes if he's traded. But for now, I don't really see a reason to trade him. And honestly, what's his value right now? Because he's been a healthy scratch for the last 2 weeks or 2 of the last 3 weeks. So what value does that give him? A conditional 7th? Are you getting a 6th for him? Are you packaging him with somebody else or a pick to get somebody else? So it'll be interesting to see. I think Williams is probably safe in Baltimore for now. I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that he gets traded. But for now, I think he's probably staying in a Ravens uniform, at least for the time being. We're going to head into our first break, though. When we return, we're going to be talking about more mailbag questions. So stay tuned for that, and we will be right back. But before we do that, hey, Ravens fans, this is Kevin Oestreicher with an incredible app everyone who buys gas needs to know about in Get Upside. Just download the free Get Upside app in the App Store or Google Play right now. You can use promo code TOUCHDOWN and get a 25-cent bonus per gallon on your first fill up. That's up to 50 cents cash back. Don't pay full price at the pump anymore. Get cash back using Get Upside. Just download the app for free and use promo code TOUCHDOWN to get up to 50 cents a gallon cash back on your first tank. Some people who drive a lot are making as much as $200 to $300 a month in cash back, and there's no catch. The cash back gets added right to your account. You can cash out anytime to your bank account, PayPal, or any gift card for Amazon and other brands. Just download the free Get Upside app and use promo code TOUCHDOWN to get up to 50 cents a gallon cash back on your first tank. That's code TOUCHDOWN. We've returned here, our second segment of this Locked On Ravens mailbag episode here on Wednesday. Kevin Oestreicher, your host, still hanging out with you here. We talked about 3 mailbag questions in the first segment. We're going to dive into 3 mailbag questions here in the second segment. But first, I do want to acknowledge a comment from Harrison L., who said, "No questions, just vibes today." And I think a lot of people are vibing out here, in Baltimore with just so many good things surrounding this team right now. The best record in the AFC, this team being resilient. Now, the Ravens have gone through their fair share of adversity with the injuries and losing guys and having a tough week 1 and playing in some really close games, 3 out of 5 in prime time to open their year. But this team's so resilient overall, and I'm very proud of what they've been able to do. So yes, vibes all around here on Locked On Ravens for sure. We're going to continue out with the running back conversation. We talked about Tyson Williams to round out that first segment. We're going to continue that here in the second segment and get into a question from TJ Lochte, who asks, do we really have faith in these veteran running backs? And so this is a valid question. I know that the actual stats for these running backs have not been amazing so far through 6 weeks, but they're continuing to grow and continuing to learn this Ravens offense. And so obviously the losses of J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards and throwing Justice Hill in there if you want to, they're huge because, one, it's not just their talent. J.K. Dobbins, for example, some of the best balance I've ever seen from a running back. Gus Edwards just has grown every single year in this offense and has added to his skill set and his arsenal. So you lose those 2 players who not only are talented, but have the experience, have at least 1 year in this Ravens offense. For Edwards, it's 3. For Dobbins, it's 1. So you're losing that. And you're bringing in veterans who teams have moved on from. You have Tyson Williams in there too. But Devonta Freeman, outside of week 6 and towards the tail end of week 5, was struggling a bit. Latavius Murray has struggled a bit as well. He's had some good moments and some bad moments. Le'Veon Bell, despite doing some good things, has had his yards per carry not look great so far this year. I mean, if you want to look at the actual yards per carry per running back, Latavius Murray's averaging 3.6. Freeman's averaging 5.9, but he did have a 31-yard run that kind of skews that a bit. And Le'Veon Bell's only averaging 2.4 yards per carry. So those aren't great numbers. You have Lamar Jackson leading this team with a 6.1 yards per carry average. I mean, if you want to throw Devin Duvernay in there and his 11 yards per carry average on 1 carry, you can do that. But, Lamar Jackson is currently the top rusher on this team. He's also the top passer on this team. So he's doing it all for this Ravens offense. Well, not all, but he's doing a lot of heavy lifting. But I do have confidence in these backs because they're using them in certain roles. Latavius Murray's getting used in that Gus Edwards role. Freeman's getting used in the Justice Hill role. And then whoever you want to classify from Le'Veon Bell and Tyson Williams is more of the free floater, kind of like an undefined role. You could maybe make a case for J.K. Dobbins, but, Le'Veon Bell isn't the same player J.K. Dobbins is, and neither is Tyson Williams. So I think as the season goes on, we'll start to see just better performances all around. Now, we'll have to see how much time Latavius Murray does miss. But now with this Ravens team, maybe Nate McCrary gets called up a couple times if they want to test him out instead of Tyson Williams. Maybe they do bring in a veteran running back. I wouldn't be overly shocked if they did. But for right now, the Ravens are 5-1 using those running backs, but it would be better if they had a bit more production out of them. So I'm not ready to throw in the towel on them just yet, but it is something to monitor, because if they continue to struggle a bit and the offense can't really get their running game going, maybe at the trade deadline, they try to work something out for a running back that could have a bit of value in this offense. So something to monitor there, definitely. Let's continue with the running backs, though. We're going to dive into a question here from Joshua Sutter, who asked a good question here, and he kind of talks about the running game and the pass game together. So he says, I'd like to know your thoughts on the passing game outside of Lamar Jackson. It looks like the offseason acquisition of T. Williams is really paying off in a big way for Baltimore so far. And so, there's the run game in there with Tyson Williams, the T. Williams acquisition, although he was on the team. He started – yeah, he played in the game last year for the Ravens, actually, Pittsburgh. He played in that game, the COVID Bowl, as people call it. But this is more transitioning from the run game into the pass game a bit. Talking about Tyson Williams, I mean, having him on the roster is definitely huge when you look at his ability to have been in the system for a year and to have that experience. Now, he's still a young guy and still didn't have any NFL experience rushing the football. He was more just like an active body in that Steelers game last year. So I think having him was a good transition period for this team, because he was getting the brunt of the work for the most part, or at least a lot more than he's getting now. He was getting a lot more work in weeks 1 and 2, while guys like Latavius Murray and Devonta Freeman and Le'Veon Bell were getting up to speed in the offense. If they didn't have a guy like Tyson Williams on this team and they had to bring in everybody new and start that off, it could have been a lot worse in week 1. I know they lost that game, but still, guys were getting acclimated, and I think Williams, with that familiarity, really did help them overall. So with Williams in that run game, especially with Nate McCrary getting claimed off of waivers by the Denver Broncos, they only had Williams as the guy who had the experience. So his ability to be on the roster and just to be the guy who had that experience in the Ravens offense was big for them. But moving on to the passing offense part of this question, what have I thought about it so far outside of Lamar Jackson? Well, it really seems like things are going a lot more smoothly for this passing offense, especially when you look at just how this Ravens team has gone about things, especially Greg Roman. Now, Greg Roman has had some bad quarters. I'm not going to say he's done everything perfect so far, but the continuity of Lamar Jackson and having a guy like Greg Roman as an offensive coordinator is huge, because if we go back to the Joe Flacco days and we look at all the offensive coordinators that Joe Flacco had, I mean, so many to list out, Cam Cameron, Jim Caldwell, Mark Trestman, Marty Morningweg, right? There are so many others. You had Gary Kubiak in there. Those are probably Flacco's, the best offense the Ravens had during that era. The Kubiak days or that year was phenomenal. But overall, with the continuity of having a play caller like Roman, and you surround Roman with coaches that really help out, T. Martin, Keith Williams, you have those guys around him. James Urban's done a great job, I think. So outside of Jackson, you have the receivers with Marquis Brown, who outside of week 3 and kind of a dud performance in week 6 has done really well in this offense. I think Rashod Bateman, now that he's had his debut and that's out of the way, he'll start to get more snaps, hopefully, and continue to grow on that performance. Sammy Watkins looked really good in his role. Now, unfortunately, he's going to probably miss some more time. That's not confirmed, but that hamstring injury might be just a couple week thing. Hopefully he'll be able to play on Sunday, but if not, I wouldn't be overly shocked, but he's looked good. Mark Andrews, after kind of a slow start touchdown wise of the year, has looked very good over these last few weeks here. He's Mark Andrews. What else can you say about him? Other than that, though, you have Devin Duvernay stepping up, James Prochet stepping up. The running backs are starting to catch out of the backfield a little bit. We've seen it with Latavius Murray. I talked about it with Freeman. So the passing offense has looked a lot better. Lamar Jackson, I know the question is outside of Jackson, but his deep ball accuracy has allowed receivers to go get footballs a bit more. It's not perfect, but it's gotten better. He's throwing to the middle of the field well. He's throwing outside the numbers well. He's looking poised and calm. And so this passing offense does go through Lamar Jackson. But it's a matter of how this Ravens team set up Jackson to be able to do what he can do with his arm talent and with his leg talent. He's just an overall very talented player. And now with the Ravens passing offense, they're working the middle of the field. They're taking deep shots, and they're switching things up, which I really like. And that's a testament to Roman. Not sticking with one thing too often. Again, we have seen it this year, but it's not as often as I think we saw it last year, which is a sign of improvement. So overall, I am pretty happy with how this passing offense has looked, and I'm excited to see just how they end up maneuvering through it for the rest of the season. And then finally here, continuing with the passing offense and kind of looking at Rashod Bateman and his debut, Ashai Patel asks, how was Rashod Bateman's debut? And so diving into Bateman's debut, 4 receptions, 29 yards. He had 6 targets, tied for the team lead with Mark Andrews. So Jackson was looking his way. I was overall pretty impressed. Now, it was not perfect. He had the ball that bounced off of his chest and landed in the hands of a Chargers defender. Great play by the Chargers defender, not a great play by Bateman. But those are mistakes that can be ironed out. You know, he's a rookie. It's his first NFL game. There were probably a bit of jitters there, even though he'd already caught 4 passes before. All 4 of his catches went for first downs, too. So he, as I called him on Twitter the day of the game, he's a professional chain mover. Now, I think that's pretty unlikely to hold up. I don't think every single one of his catches at the NFL level will go for a first down throughout his entire career. I hope so, but maybe not. So I think that Bateman played well, and especially in a role where he had to take on a lot more snaps. We kind of talked about this yesterday with Spencer Schultz of Baltimore Beatdown, but John Harbaugh during Monday's press conference said that he played a lot more than the team was expecting him to. I think he played 45 snaps in that game. So he was playing a lot. I was expecting more of like 30, but with Sammy Watkins out, he was thrust into a bit of a bigger role. And I think he did a pretty good job at it, all things considered. Now, Bateman is a player who can do a lot for an offense. He can play on the inside or on the outside. He's not a burner, but he can beat you deep. He's able to work the middle of the field well. He's a technician of a route runner. So this player comp is what the Ravens needed. They needed an outside guy, kind of a bigger body. He did look a bit thin on the field, but hopefully that'll change. I think we saw the transformation, for example, Marquis Brown from year 1 to year 2 and year 2 to year 3. So maybe we'll see that transformation in the offseason. But I think Bateman was the perfect pick at 27, and I think his debut was really, really good. Now, we're all waiting on that first touchdown, right? Hopefully it comes this weekend against Cincinnati. Maybe that's one of my bold predictions. You'll have to stay tuned. But I do think that Bateman, next to Marquis Brown, next to Mark Andrews, and Sammy Watkins once he come back, it makes a very, very lethal passing offense. And if that run game can get going, as we talked about, this Ravens offense has the potential to do major damage, more than they've already been doing over the course of this 2021 season. We're going to head into our final break, though. When we return, we are going to be diving into the last batch of our mailbag questions. So stay tuned for that, and we will be back soon. But this episode of Locked on Ravens is brought to you by McDonald's, proudly serving communities since 1965. McDonald's has always been more than just a place to get tasty, affordable food. It's a place where friends and family can come to reconnect. When to lose, it's a place where teammates, competitors, the home team, or the away team can come to recharge. It's the place you always look forward to stopping at on a long road trip to rest your legs and refuel. You can go to McDonald's after a Little League game, or you can stop in after a big sporting event. So head over to your local McDonald's to refuel and reconnect. And even someone said Locked on Ravens watch party. That could be happening there at McDonald's. I'm loving it. And Built Bar is the best tasting protein bar ever. If you haven't tried a Built Bar by now, you're missing out. They say it's the protein bar, but it does not taste like one. You have to try one of these amazing bars yourself to believe it. Most protein bars, they can be chalky or waxy or just plain hard to choke down. A Built Bar is soft. It's covered in 100% real chocolate, and when you bite into it, you know you're eating something different. It's more of an experience, one that you'll enjoy. In fact, you'd swear you're almost eating a candy bar. Another great thing about Built Bar, there are so many delicious flavors, including coconut, raspberry, mint brownie, salted caramel, double chocolate, and cherry barcia. So go to Built.com and use promo code LOCKED15. I get 15% off of your order. Use promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at Built.com. We return here. It's our final segment of this Locked on Ravens Mailbag edition episode here on Wednesday. Your host, Kevin Oestreicher, still hanging out with you here. And we're now going to dive into the last batch of our mailbag questions. We talked about Rashod Bateman to round out that second segment. Let's continue talking about Rashod Bateman here in this final segment. A question here from Joshua Elsrode, who asks, what is Bateman's role in this offense once Watkins returns? And this is a very good question, because Bateman, as I kind of talked about heading into our final break, Bateman is a guy who played a lot more than I think the Ravens anticipated. John Harbaugh said that, playing about 45 snaps. So I do believe that once Watkins comes back, Bateman's snaps will be scaled back a bit, but this is a team that now has the depth at wide receiver. So Bateman's inclusion in this offense is a bit of not a question mark, because he is going to get snaps. He's a big part of what they're planning to do, it seems like, on the offensive side of the ball. I mean, he wouldn't have had a team high in targets if not. But with Devin Duvernay there and James Prochet there, and you obviously have Marquis Brown and Andrews and Sammy Watkins, there are a lot of mouths to feed on that offense. So I still think Bateman is going to have a big role. I don't think he's all of a sudden, once Watkins comes back, the Ravens are going to say, all right, we're going to shut him down for the year and only give him 10 snaps a game. He will play. I think he will play, but there are going to probably be situations where he's not on the field and the Ravens, I guess, value the veteran more. We've seen that from them over the last couple of seasons. And really, throughout the John Harbaugh era to an extent, there's a lot that goes into a rookie playing. For example, J.K. Dobbins, 25 carries in his first 6 games, and that was a guy who was ripping off 25-yard runs and 40-yard runs and 30-yard runs. So Bateman will have to earn his snaps. He still has to earn them right now. But once Watkins comes back, I'm really excited to see hopefully 3 receiver sets with Bateman, Watkins, and Brown. This isn't like, Bateman is only playing until Watkins comes back and then Watkins comes back and Bateman's done. He'll still have a role, but he will probably have to cede a couple of snaps to Watkins because Watkins is the veteran and he has that established connection with Lamar Jackson that Bateman will get to. But for now, he's only played in 1 game, so he's still learning. He'll probably go through a couple of rough stretches, which is expected for a rookie, right? It happens. So I'm excited to see where Bateman fits in on this offense. He's getting a lot of snaps now, and when Watkins comes back, I still expect him to get a lot of snaps, but we will see how it ends up working out. And we have 2 more questions here. One we'll get into from Ron, who asks, what is your confidence level in this team coming out of the bye as we face some really good teams as well as AFC North teams? So this is a good question because the front half of the schedule versus the back half of the schedule for the Ravens, it's different. I had talked about it before the season started where I thought that it would be key for the Ravens to start off really fast during the beginning portion of their schedule because you talk about what's after the bye and you have teams in there like Miami, and you have guys like Minnesota and then Chicago, but you hit week 12 and all of a sudden 5 of their last 7 games are against divisional opponents, and the 2 who are not divisional opponents are the Green Bay Packers and the Los Angeles Rams. So that's a very tough back half. So the Ravens now being 5-1, and if they lose to Cincinnati, we can call it 5-2. We'll get into my final score predictions throughout the rest of the week, but if they do go 5-2, that's all things considered pretty good, especially coming out of the bye. And if this team can maybe head into week 12, like in the 8-2 range or the 7-3 range, I think that'd be great. Now, looking at the Ravens in that back half of the schedule, I think it starts in week 12, as I talked about. The week 12, week 13, week 14 is Cleveland at home, then Pittsburgh away, then Cleveland away. So that's a pretty brutal stretch considering Cleveland has Baltimore away, a bye, and then Baltimore home. So, we can talk about the Browns and their injuries, and they've been struggling a bit recently, but they're still a good football team. I still think they're the Ravens' biggest challenger in the AFC North. So I'm confident in this team, but with the start they have had this year, it gives them a bit more leeway to drop a game or 2 in the back half of their schedule and not have it directly impact their playoff standing as much. It'll still impact it, but if this team was 4-2 right now, or even you want to go drastic and be like, all right, they're 1-5 right now, that would be brutal. Then they couldn't lose any games. They could barely lose any games. But now that they are 5-1, they can afford to drop a couple and still be okay in the playoff race because having tiebreakers, for example, with Kansas City and with the Los Angeles Chargers and even Indianapolis, for example, those are teams and those are tiebreakers that can come into effect and come in handy as we get into the end of December, beginning of January, as playoff seedings begin to take shape. And finally, here, our last question that comes from You Get No Buns, and he asks, when will Nick Boyle be back? And this is a question a lot of people want to know the answer to. I wish I had the answer to it. Unfortunately, I don't. John Harbaugh did provide a good update for Boyle, kind of saying he's close, it feels like, for him. That's not exactly what he said, but he pretty much said that. But, I think he's still probably a couple weeks away. I wouldn't be shocked if they hold him out until after the bye. I think that'd probably be the smartest thing to do, just considering, you have the Cincinnati game, then you have the bye. So then you bring him back after. He has the extra couple weeks to heal, and you can kind of figure that, all right, he's going to be 100% by then. If he is, if he's not, then they hold him out. Honestly, just like with Stanley, I think that this Ravens team should definitely just just hold it out and hold him out until he's 100% healthy, because if he's not, one, you're not getting the product that you need on the field and that Boyle can be on the field, and he's hurting the team maybe more than helping it. And two, is the risk-free injury. So just, making sure that Boyle is able to play at the level he's able to play at, that there's not a risk-free injury that would directly come from rushing him back. The team's been very smart about that, I think, with a lot of their players this year. So Boyle's huge to what they do on offense. He's like an extra offensive lineman out there. So overall, I think a couple weeks, again, I wouldn't be shocked if it's after the bye. I think that's like the minimum I'd say is right after the bye. If I were to give a maximum where I'd say that, all right, this is the worst case scenario for Boyle. I mean, obviously it's what happened with Stanley and it's, surgery again. But I'd say probably week 12 is the timeline for me. Again, I'm no doctor. I don't know the inner workings of the injury. Just like some guesswork here for me, don't quote me. But I think that, in my opinion, week 12 is like that. All right, I think now is the time to get a bit worried about Boyle. But, we'll see. Those injuries are so unpredictable. And regardless of if it is after the bye, if it is week 12 or even later, I still think the Ravens will be handling it the right way with Boyle for sure. That's all I have for you here today on Locked On Ravens. Though when we get back tomorrow, we'll be diving into another crossover Thursday, this time with Locked On Bengals. So stay tuned for that, and I will see you tomorrow.